So Lowell spends thousands of hours in his observatory painstakingly drawing sketches of what he sees in his telescope. He transfers those sketches onto maps and then Martian globes.
There are several things in the archives. There are all of his working papers and all of his manuscripts. The maps, the globes, those kinds of things that we have, they're a true treasure, as this observatory is a treasure, and I think we have to treat it as that.
And it is during the Lowell era that other scientists are inspired to take alien hunting in a whole new direction. If we can see them, the scientists muse, maybe they can see us. At the turn of the 19th century, mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss proposes planting broad bands of wheat in the Siberian forest to form a vast right-angled triangle as an unmistakable sign of earthly intelligence that could be seen from space. Austrian astronomer Joseph von Lüttrow suggests a scheme to dig a series of mile-long canals in the Sahara Desert and then set them on fire to signal to our Martian cousins. In France, scientist Charles Cros urges his government to build a gigantic mirror to reflect sunlight towards Mars. But the biggest ideas are still coming out of America. The recent discovery of radio waves in 1887 was transforming all branches of science. And the idea that something or someone out there could receive our messages or send one of their own meant we now had the possibility of communicating with other worlds. This was the dream of Nikola Tesla, a Serbian-born American physicist and engineer.
Tesla was doing experiments out in Colorado Springs around 1899, and it was in the course of those experiments that he believed that he had actually detected a signal. He didn't publish anything on this until 1901 because he realized it would be very controversial, but he did publish a little article in 1901 called Talking with the Planets, and he predicted in there that this would be one of the major themes of the 20th century.
In 1901, Tesla writes,
"The disturbances I'd observed might be due to an intelligent control. The feeling is constantly growing on me that I had been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another."
Tesla's announcement is widely reported, but in academic circles, the idea of radio communication with outer space is greeted with almost unanimous skepticism, even ridicule. It would be another 2 decades before the idea of interplanetary communication is revived by another radio pioneer, Guglielmo Marconi.
Marconi, as early as 1919, believed that he had made a detection, again by radio, from Mars. And this was played out in the pages of the New York Times during 1919 and the early 1920s.
We have not the slightest proof of their origin. They are sounds. They may be signals. We do not know.
Marconi himself eventually lost interest in that, and it sort of remained a mystery what these dots and dashes were that were received by Marconi. Others, carried forward with the idea that there might be something to it.
One of those others is astronomer David Todd. His specialty had been solar eclipses, but in the 1920s, Todd also becomes fascinated with the possibility that Martians might be communicating with Earth via radio waves.
Todd already in 1909 had the idea that you might take a balloon flight up above some of the atmosphere and use radio apparatus there to try to detect a signal from Mars.
David Todd thought that by putting sensitive wireless telegraph receivers aloft and away from any obstructions in the atmosphere, signals to and from Mars would come in a whole lot better. On August 29th and 30th, 1924, Mars is at its closest point to Earth, optimal conditions for communicating with the red planet, Todd believes. He asks the U.S. military to shut down all radio transmissions in the Washington, D.C. area for a short amount of time. Amazingly, they comply. The Chief of Naval Operations sends a dispatch to the radio facilities under his command, telling them to avoid any unnecessary communications and to listen for any unusual signals. After Todd switches on his radio gear, several strange signals are in fact detected at several sites. But the most unusual phenomenon occurs because of an invention by another scientist who is with Todd. C. Francis Jenkins had invented an early version of television called the Radio Photo Message Continuous Transmission Machine. During Todd's experiment, Jenkins records what is described as a curious picturization of radio phenomenon.
What came out in the picture was something that looked like a face. And Jenkins was more conservative than Todd. Jenkins said that he really believed that this was not something related to Mars, but Todd, always pressing forward sort of in a Lowellian kind of a way, said that maybe it could be.
We now have a permanent record which can be studied, and who knows until we've studied it just what the signals may have been. But the important thing is to have a record.
The picturization is 30 feet long and 6 inches wide. Some see the profile of a man. Others the possibility that this is a Martian code that the aliens are hoping we Earthlings can decipher. Half the film is turned over for analysis to William Friedman, the U.S. Army's chief of cryptography, who was world-renowned for cracking a number of German codes during World War I. If there was a message in this signal, Friedman died without deciphering it. The film was found in his private papers following his death. The man who had solved so many code riddles apparently never stopped puzzling over this one. When we continue, some Americans start to believe that Martians aren't going to wait around for us to figure out their messages. It's time to invade.
If we were on the verge of building rockets that could go into space, maybe the aliens were able to build rockets that had come here.
In the 1930s and 40s, scientists were discovering strange new worlds all the time, holding out the possibility that one of them might be inhabited. And it was Hollywood's job to show us what they would look like when they got here. Pulp fiction had its own versions with aliens that seemed to take on the personality of the times. Then, in 1947, a U.S. Forest Service pilot named Kenneth Arnold is flying over Washington State when he sees what he describes as flying discs. A few days later, the U.S. Army appears to confirm the possibility of alien invaders with a press release. Dateline, Roswell, New Mexico. It is the birth of the UFO era, and soon thousands of sightings of UFOs are being reported to civilian and military authorities. Movies and television fan the flames of a burning enthusiasm for the idea that beings from another planet have visited Earth and continue to do so.
The Cold War had set in, right? And people were afraid of things in the sky, because things in the sky could, after all, be Soviet bombers headed your way. So, you know, if we were on the verge of building rockets that could go into space, maybe the aliens were able to build rockets that had come here. So I think that there was sort of a conflation of all these sorts of factors that operate